The boy possesses the ultimate swordsmanship, which surpasses even thunder, but because he lacks magical talent, he is subjected to ridicule by his classmates. Even his teacher wishes he could expel him immediately, as in this world dominated by magic, he can't use any magical skills other than his sword techniques. In this place, magic is power. As a result, to avoid expulsion, Will has to defeat monsters in the dungeon every day and use the credits earned to maintain his grades. However, his frequent visits to the dungeon unexpectedly honed his superhuman reflexes and photographic memory. Today, the teacher prepared to have Will, who lacks magical abilities, perform a magic spell. He was simply supposed to pick up the catalyst in front of him to control the flames. Facing such a straightforward practical exercise, Will could only hold his wand in silence. The laughter continued for a moment until the teacher asked the students to stop. Everyone thought he was going to comfort Will, but surprisingly, the teacher mocked Will, calling him a bookworm. At that moment, a classmate used a wand to successfully ignite the catalyst in front of Will with a fire spell, meeting the teacher's expectations. The teacher hoped Will would choose to drop out on his own. This has been a regular occurrence in Will's life. He couldn't remember how many times the teacher had put him in such difficult situations. Sion, who had acted earlier, also made it a point to trouble Will daily. Despite this, Will did not become despondent. Among his classmates, there were those who considered him a friend. Colette, a girl of noble lineage, did not see Will as useless. Instead, she secretly harbored feelings for him. This led to Will, who was oblivious to her feelings, often sharing stories about childhood friends. Once, invaders threatened humanity from above this world. But fortunately, 5 magicians emerged to save mankind. After their heroic deeds, they were granted the highest honor of the 5 supreme battles. Elfaria, who grew up with Will, became the youngest ever among the 5 supreme battles in less than 10 years. Thus, Will continued his pursuit to follow in Elfaria's footsteps, despite not having magical abilities. He still vividly remembers their promise to fight side by side. Today, his unauthorized entry into the dungeon was discovered by another teacher. Warkner, upon learning that Will had bypassed the first level and directly ventured into the 7th level of the dungeon, thought Will was insane, considering the strength of the monsters there. But this was also what Will did to avoid being expelled, as he needed to defeat higher-level monsters to earn more credits. Witnessing this, Warkner seemed to remind him that it was impossible to graduate merely on credits, especially since Will was a muggle who knew no magic. However, upon hearing this, Will did not plan to give up, because the only thing he could do now was to keep killing monsters. Seeing Will's determination, Warkner gave him a tip. According to Will's current grades, he needed to earn 4 credits this week to avoid expulsion. Will was shocked. Today was Friday, which meant he only had 2 days left until the next test. He immediately started to check his books for any monsters worth 4 credits, remembering that the teacher had mentioned it last month. Seeing Will so anxious, Warkner then told him about a monster named Baskerville on the 6th level of the dungeon, which was worth exactly 4 credits. This news made Will ecstatic. He joyfully hugged his teacher, unaware that outside the door, someone had just overheard their conversation. This person was Sion, who also planned to go to the 6th level to eliminate Will, whom he saw as a pest to the school. Thus, an unknowing Will arrived here, slightly excited because he had previously fought Baskerville on the 6th level. Although he had not defeated it then, the experienced Will knew that as long as he avoided Baskerville's flames, he was completely confident he could win this time. Meanwhile, Sion entered with 3 lackeys, not planning to attack Will directly. By defeating the monster before Will could, Sion hoped to prevent Will from earning the credits, thus leading to his expulsion. However, the other 2, who had never ventured beyond the 1st level of the dungeon, were not confident about this plan. Nonetheless, as an elite of the academy, Sion ignored their concerns. But just as they were talking, a sandbag-sized fist appeared out of nowhere. The commotion quickly caught Will's attention nearby. When Will arrived and saw what was happening, he was stunned. The monster in front of them was not Baskerville, but the evil spirit sentinel from the 10th level, a creature worth 10 credits. Such a formidable opponent should not have appeared on this level. Considering there might be an issue with the dungeon, Will also saw a man battling the evil spirit sentinel. Sion, in panic, used his flame magic to attack, but it caused no damage. Now, Will faced a dilemma. He wanted to intervene, but Scion had always mocked him. But if he didn't intervene, Scion might just die. However, in that moment of indecision, Will remembered what his childhood friend Alfaria had once told him. She had said he was brave and had even given him a pair of glasses. Wearing these glasses symbolized Will's resolve. At that moment, Will, like a longsword, managed to block the attack of the evil spirit sentinel. Meanwhile, the teacher found Workner. It turned out that when he learned that his good student Scion had gone to the 6th level of the labyrinth with 2 novices, he immediately suspected it might have something to do with Will. Yet, Workner reassured Eduardo that there was no need to worry if it was the 6th level, because Will was there too. He then used a magic sphere to show the battle taking place on the 6th level. There, Will was seen fighting the evil spirit sentinel single-handedly. In the next moment, Will managed to chop off a finger of the sentinel. Nobody expected that Will could hold his own against the foe. Scion, at the scene, couldn't understand how Will, a so-called magicless nobody, could force the mighty sentinel to retreat. Even Eduardo, the teacher, was taken aback. He couldn't believe that Will, whom he once mocked, now possessed combat capabilities surpassing that of a magician. Seeing Eduardo's expression, Workner unusually commented that he had recognized Will's talent all along. Will's unnatural strength, akin to that of a dwarf, his resilience, and his ability to understand an enemy's movements after just one look, showed that Will was a true genius in swordsmanship. Indeed, he could not use magic, but he was the only warrior in this magical world. Then, with a swing of his great sword, Will's sword energy amazed Scion. As the evil spirit sentinel launched a death ray, Will managed to slay it with a single strike. The battle ended there. Will approached Scion and extended his hand, asking if he was hurt. At that moment, Scion went mad. On the other side, Eduardo, watching through the crystal ball, furiously questioned Workner. He couldn't accept that someone who did not possess magic could surpass those who did. The next day, Workner saw that Will had recklessly challenged a more powerful monster, and unusually, he did not become angry. He acknowledged that this young man would be the one to upheave the world. The man never expected that he, being the closest to a godlike figure, would one day be defeated by a student he had always looked down upon. In this world where magic reigned supreme, the student possessed no talent for casting spells. Yet, he was able to surpass magic with his demon-slaying sword. Because of this, he was treated coldly by his teacher. To Eduardo, the magic teacher, the academy had no place for such an anomaly. So he approached the principal to have Will expelled. However, the principal only presented Will's academic record. Apart from his inability to perform magic, Will was a genius. His grades were excellent in all subjects. Even if he couldn't become one of the Supreme 5 staves, he could be trained towards becoming a sage. Despite this, Eduardo remained stubborn. The principal then suggested Eduardo personally test Will. If Will failed the test, Eduardo could decide his fate, hoping he would see the situation clearly. The principal had recognized Will's talent in swordsmanship 5 years earlier. Although Will appeared frail, he became incredibly resilient when he wielded a sword. This was why the principal had admitted him to the academy. While Will had earned 10 credits, he still had a long way to go to reach the summit and become one of the Supreme 5 staves. To advance to the upper academy, students could either create new magic or earn 7,200 credits. For most, the latter was the preferable option. However, these students were struggling even to graduate. Will's only flaw was his inability to score in magical subjects. To graduate smoothly, he worked harder than anyone else in other subjects. Because he lacked any magical ability, he needed help from a blonde-haired friend, even to open his locker. While studying together, Eduardo approached them. He took Will alone to the arena, displeased with Will's continual failures in magical subjects. He decided to give Will a chance. If Will could land a hit on him, he would earn 5 credits in the subject. Otherwise, he would have to leave the academy. Will had no choice. Meanwhile, Workner was called to the principal's office. It was he who had advocated for keeping Will, so the principal felt it was only fair to consider Eduardo's perspective. Now they would see if Will deserved to pursue the goal of becoming one of the Supreme 5 staves. However, Workner thought the contest was unfair, as Eduardo was the man closest to becoming one of the Supreme 5 staves. Although he had failed in the final selection, He was once a reacher who had nearly reached the summit. Facing his teacher's attack, Will dared not let his guard down. Even attacks from behind were successfully intercepted by the teacher. The next second, Will realized that all of Eduardo's magic could be cast without chance, and that his offense and defense were flawless. It seemed almost impossible to hurt him. Surprisingly to Will, Eduardo could generate multiple instances of a single basic spell at once. Even though Will had honed his physical skills to the extreme, he couldn't dodge the barrage of attacks. Eduardo elegantly reveled in the pleasure brought by his magic, making Will struggle to defend himself. Meanwhile, the blonde-haired friend anxiously awaited Will. Teacher Eduardo, known for never going easy on students, watched as a magic pet, covered in wounds, walked in. Pointing at the locker in front, the blonde quickly guessed its intention. By then, Will had already collapsed on the ground. Eduardo stated, "If you can't even surpass me, then there's no way you can become one of the Supreme 5 Staves." He also told Will about the time when the dwarf race, with an army of 10,000, instigated a rebellion, but a single magician suppressed it single-handedly. This, he said, was the truth of their world. One magic staff could defeat 10,000 warriors, so the sword could never surpass the staff. Yet even so, Will was determined to become one of the Supreme 5 Staves, something Eduardo found incomprehensible. What noble reason could possibly drive him? But Will's response was simple. He just wanted to keep a promise made to his childhood friend, to stand together at the highest peak and watch the sunset. Just then, the blonde threw Will his weapon. The moment the sword was drawn, Will's eyes hardened with resolve. Facing Eduardo's magic attack, he no longer dodged but cut it straight through. Eduardo recognized it as a demon-slaying sword. But how would that matter? If he attacked all at once, he doubted Will could evade. At that moment, Will's hands and feet trembled, and he wanted so badly to flee. But he couldn't afford to fail here. The next second, he found a breakthrough. Seeing this, Eduardo launched a fierce attack. Will refused to accept the teacher's words. A magician is also a brave warrior, and indeed, swords have long been able to rival staves. Under the intense light, Will slashed across the teacher's face. Eduardo kept his promise and awarded Will 5 credits. The principal applauded the fight. Will had deliberately jumped into the dense attack to conceal himself, then struck a deadly blow from above, breaking through the barrier. Such indomitable spirit was indeed valuable. The boy simply killed an Ice King as usual, but unexpectedly, this caught the attention of the world's strongest 5 staves. In their understanding, magic is the absolute power in this world. Yet the boy chose a different path. He perfected a sword technique so despised even by dogs. Once his sword was drawn, any monster in front of him would not survive more than 2.5 seconds. Just then, Will saw his childhood friend in the report, one of the 5 staves, the Ice Princess. As the youngest magical prodigy in history, she had created a new magic spell, her 12th innovation. Because of this, she needed a large number of frost cores. To help his childhood friend, Will immediately ran back to his dorm to change his equipment. Since the target was on the 4th level, he needed a tool made by his roommate. Once everything was ready, Will headed to the 4th floor of the dungeon, which was already crowded with students, as it was a mission issued by the genius girl. Even the school bully, Cyan, was there. After he had dispatched 7 ice infantry, only Cyan himself knew that this was not enough. Originally, Will had soloed monsters hundreds of times stronger than these. Seeing everyone gathering at the entrance of the 4th level, Will had to continue exploring deeper. But fate always comes so suddenly. Just as he landed, he found a girl in distress. He quickly killed 3 monsters to save her, so fast that the girl did not even realize what had happened. However, she vaguely recognized that the techniques Will used were not magic. After thanking Will, the girl introduced herself as Alice. From their conversation, Alice learned that Will was the rumored bookworm. Will didn't mind, though, as many in the school looked down on him as a non-magical person. Oddly, Alice addressed him respectfully as senior, making Will wonder if she didn't dislike him. However, Alice's reason was simple. How could she scorn someone who had helped her? She wanted to assist the Supreme 5 Staves and become a supporter of the sky herself. As Alice said, they had never seen the real sky. The sky covering the world was just a barrier, set up jointly by the 5 Staves to fend off external threats. If the barrier were ever broken, the world would be engulfed in darkness again. Thus, upon hearing about the mission, students actively collected cores, not only out of admiration for the 5 staves, but also to help support the sky. At that moment, Alice told Will that she had actually met Elfaria, his childhood friend. Just like the scene just now, she was alone in the dungeon facing a crisis. It was Elfaria who stepped in at the critical moment and rescued her. That was why she became enamored with Elfaria and would do anything for her. So, she volunteered to come here alone, but unfortunately, she couldn't find any ice infantry. Even using wide-range detection, she couldn't find any. It seemed they had already been hunted by others. However, Will, based on the movement traces left by the monsters, guessed that there was a formidable character ahead, because ordinary ice infantry would only leave behind ice fragments 0.5 to 1 meter thick, but the fragments here were several times larger. This confused Alice. Will clearly didn't use magic, so how could he know such things? Will pointed out that although magic was powerful, it was not absolute, especially in dungeons where experience and knowledge were key. After entering the cave, a giant monster attacked, but he easily dodged its assault. It turned out that the Ice King was a higher-class variety of ice infantry, unique to the 4th level. Alice felt this was not an opponent Will could handle, as getting close to the Ice King would result in being frozen, and defeating it would require long-range magic. However, Will assured her not to worry, as this wasn't his first time defeating such a creature. The tool he had borrowed from his roommate was specifically for dealing with the Ice King. Will used his agility and small stature to maneuver around the Ice King, perfectly binding the magical tool around every part of its body. The monster attempted to break free and launched a fierce counterattack, but Will had pinpointed its weakness. He activated the tool and killed it instantly. After killing the Ice King, a bunch of frost cores burst out, but Alice's expression changed upon witnessing this. It turned out that this was the capability of someone considered powerless, completely different from the rumors she had heard. Alice was actually directly under the highest 5 staves. They had specifically sent Alice to find strong individuals because the invaders from the sky were watching them from the other side of the barrier. Yet they lacked the strength and numbers to fight them. Therefore, they needed to discover more powerful individuals. Alice would report exactly what she had seen and even recommended that Will become a member of the tower, but this was rejected by both. Alf didn't want to add more of the inferior kind, but Zeo thought differently. Wiseman proposed to reconsider after the Grand Magic Festival. The two parted without agreement. Elfaria said she would wait here for Will. The man had never imagined that the universally acknowledged worst student in the academy, the one who couldn't use magic and was considered useless, would now dare to embarrass him, a favorite of the heavens, in public, infuriating him completely. He could never have foreseen that he would ultimately be defeated by Will, the so-called useless one. Shortly after defeating the Frost King, the Academy organized a comprehensive test to identify the strongest candidates and form a team to participate in the Grand Magic Festival. While other students demonstrated impressive talents, Will, the perpetual underachiever, couldn't even defeat a minor soldier, which drew ridicule from those around him, labeling him as a book-smart but practically useless student. During a practical class, while Will felt embarrassed by his poor performance, an even more embarrassing scene unfolded. The Academy's top geniuses easily knocked down a horde of monsters with minimal effort. Among them, Julius was particularly terrifying, freezing all targets with a single move. This spectacle made the onlookers gasp and regard these individuals as potential champions of the Grand Magic Festival. To qualify for the festival, one must form a team of 3 with a combined total of over 10,000 academic credits. Any of these geniuses alone surpassed that threshold, a fact that made Will feel particularly dismayed. This year was his last at the Academy, yet his credits were nowhere close to theirs, making even graduation uncertain, let alone further education. Will was troubled by this, but just then, Julius passed by and mocked him mercilessly, something Will had heard countless times over the years and had grown accustomed to. At lunch, Colette encouraged Will to demonstrate his skills at the Grand Magic Festival to clear his name. However, Will immediately refused, as he had participated once in his sophomore year and had caused chaos, which had cemented his reputation as the worst student. Colette had no choice but to drop the matter. That evening, Will went to work at a shop in the Dwarven district. Unlike others outside, the people here were quite kind to Will, as the dwarves themselves were marginalized by the world for their inability to use magic. Thus, Will held great respect for the dwarves and often worked in their shop to immerse himself in their culture. However, an unexpected incident occurred today. The other restaurants being full, Julius, the Academy's top talent, had no choice but to dine here. Upon entering, he immediately started to complain about the barbaric atmosphere of the place. Discovering that Will was working part-time here, he burst into mocking laughter, remarking that Will, a useless person, indeed matched well with the inferior barbarians. The surrounding dwarves instantly became uncomfortable at these words, but they dared not react physically. They were not natives of this world, but refugees who had fled here after being defeated by invaders from the skies. If they were to strike a local mage, they would have nowhere else to go, no matter the circumstances. Seeing that they didn't dare to retort, the mockery from Julius and his companions grew even more unrestrained. The trash talk became so unbearable that even Will couldn't stand it anymore. After enduring 2.5 hours of torment, Will finally lost his patience. He walked up to them and demanded they take back their derogatory statements. At this, Julius just laughed, and his two companions joined in with further insults. Unexpectedly, the next moment, Will knocked the two companions to the ground, which triggered Julius to retaliate. A chill filled the entire restaurant as Julius attacked Will. Ice spears continuously stabbed at Will, eventually pinning him against a wall. Julius thought such a vast disparity in power would make Will recognize his place. However, when he approached, he didn't see the submission in Will's eyes that he expected. This prompted Julius to change his plan of simply teaching Will a lesson there. He realized that only by crushing Will's dignity in front of everyone could he truly relieve his anger. With that, he invited Will to participate in the Grand Magic Festival, intending to brutally humiliate him there. Although knowing it was a trap, Will accepted the challenge because this time he was truly angry. Julius arrogantly made harsh threats, and Will set his own condition. If he won, Julius must apologize to the shop owner. The man never imagined that the boy who was ridiculed by the entire school for being unable to use magic, a muggle, would become famous in one battle during the magic festival. Despite not knowing how to use magic, he was able to sweep away everything with just his physical prowess and swordsmanship, leaving even the top 3 teams of the school year far behind. This instantly shattered everyone's perceptions. It should be noted that in the usual practical magic classes, Will would basically score 0. But what they didn't know was that these classes only allowed the use of magic, never giving Will a chance to showcase his true strength. Just now, as the Magic Festival was about to begin, due to the competition requiring teams of 3, Colette invited Sion to join her team. Thinking that Colette had finally acknowledged his worth, Sion agreed without hesitation. However, it turned out that Will, the so-called underachiever, was also in this team. Although somewhat annoyed, he couldn't back out at this point. The host of the event had already begun explaining the rules. Once it started, all participants would be randomly placed around the venue with different environments depending on their locations. This was a specially crafted magical space by elves. Regardless of the area they were assigned, all participants had to pass through one mandatory location, the Central Forest area. After crossing this forest, they would arrive at the venue. The team that first seized the crown at the center would be the winners of the first round. They would have to face not only harsh natural conditions, but also various traps set within the venue, all crafted by renowned teachers from the school. This time, 4 teams were particularly favored, 3 of which were rightfully the top 3 teams of the school year. The champion was very likely to emerge from them. However, there was another team that garnered attention for a different reason. Will's team. The incapable who couldn't use magic daring to participate in the Magic Festival made the whole audience laugh, but he had grown accustomed to their mockery. He had only one thing to do. That was to seek revenge against Julius. The competition officially began soon after, but before that, including him, all participants had to first pass through a formation of giant stones, which was more accurately a formidable barrier composed of golems, serving as an appetizer for the competitors. To the host's surprise, Will was the first to attempt to break through. This scene immediately amused the spectators, for during regular practical magic classes, Will couldn't harm even a single golem. However, They were unaware that this was because those classes were limited to the use of magic. Although the same rule applied this time, with Colette behind him, he was able to use the earthen magic weapons she created to fight. Although not as handy as a sword, this was a significant addition to Will's capabilities. Besides his swordsmanship, his physical strength was also quite extraordinary. Each of his strikes could instantly kill a golem. Witnessing this scene left everyone speechless. Was this still the incapable they knew? When he came to his senses, Will had already passed through the formation of giant stones and was the first among all squads to break through. After entering the rocky desert area, he faced the traps within the venue. This test challenged the competitors on how to deal with long-range attacks. In a world where even a dog could perform magic, long-range attacks were a basic skill for all magicians. However, for Will, who could not use magic, this was a challenge. Just when everyone thought he would falter, not only could he use physical magic to defend himself, but with Colette's cooperation, swords suddenly appeared all over the venue. With a sword in hand, Will could eliminate one target after another, hitting with 100% accuracy, making him seem unstoppable. In just a short time, he had destroyed all the invisible rocks, and Scion didn't even get a chance to make a move. Thus, they effortlessly passed through the desert area, shocking everyone because up to that point, Will's team was the fastest. However, upon hearing the commentary at the venue, Julius was quite disdainful because he hadn't yet shown his real skills. But this also made him realize that he couldn't continue at his leisurely pace. Meanwhile, Will had already reached the forest area, which was also full of specially designed traps. However, these were virtually ineffective against him, and he could solve them effortlessly. Originally, the traps in the forest were Eduardo's masterpiece, and the ease with which they were broken embarrassed him. Although Will's team was the first to reach the forest, he was not happy but rather looked solemn because he had a premonition that he would encounter Julius here, since the forest was a mandatory passage for everyone. Rather than being caught off guard, he preferred to find a place to ambush. But just as he was about to do so, an attack hit Will. Fortunately, it only went through his clothes, and upon closer inspection, the attacker was none other than Julius himself. Seeing that Julius had arrived even earlier was a shock to Colette, considering they had not stopped for a moment so far. But with this, a fierce battle was imminent. Julius didn't hesitate to use magic again. Although the attacks were dense, Will was already accustomed to them. While his agility surprised Julius, what surprised him more was Scion, who seemed to be charging up for a major move. Despite this, Julius remained unfazed, not only confident in himself, but also suddenly realizing that Scion might have other intentions. At this moment, Colette also realized that she had thought Scion was helping Will, but now she discovered that Scion intended to take out both Will and Julius. When Will came to his senses, he was quite baffled. Looking around, the area where he was had turned into a sea of fire, and Julius had already disappeared. But at that moment, he finally understood that Scion planned to take him down as well, and neither Will nor Colette knew why Scion had such intentions. The man had never expected that the boy, who had always been at the bottom of the school rankings and couldn't use magic, would suddenly take flight and jump thousands of meters. Just as the champion was about to be decided, he finally stopped hiding his true abilities, landing like a meteor, stunning everyone watching. But the one who felt it most was Scion, who had planned to teach him a lesson during this competition because he always seemed so arrogant despite being a nobody. Scion used the competition as an opportunity to put him in his place, which left the unsuspecting audience dumbfounded. Weren't these two supposed to be teammates in this competition? Especially those from the tower who came to scout for talent. They had given up on the magicless Will, but thought Scion, ranked 4th in the school year, was a promising candidate who could possibly be directly admitted to the tower. However, an internal conflict between teammates during this crucial magic festival dropped their evaluation of Scion to rock bottom. But the most perplexing was Will, who was far from arrogant. He simply wanted to catch up to his childhood friend and become one of the Supreme 5 staffs. Hence, he avoided getting involved with others. He couldn't understand why he was always treated differently just because he couldn't use magic. What he didn't know was that when everyone mocked Will back then, Scion had actually considered protecting him and even declared that if Will became his follower, no one would bully him. Unexpectedly, Will ignored his goodwill, so Scion, frustrated and embarrassed, joined those who bullied Will. But after witnessing Will's terrifying hidden strength by chance, Cyan felt played. Will was so strong but always pretended to be weak and didn't fight back. The reason for ignoring him all this time was clearly because he saw him as a joke. So old grudges and new ones erupted together, leading to the current scene. Will had not intended to engage in a deadly fight in this competition, but soon he realized that the attacks Cyan was launching seemed deadly serious. It was also at this moment that he noticed Cyan had made a breakthrough in his understanding of fire. Typically, a guardian like the Firebird could be immobilized by severing its wings, which would have been his chance to take Cyan down. But then he discovered the Firebird had the ability to rapidly repair itself. Without targeting its vital points, all efforts would be in vain. This realization shocked Will, and the audience felt the same. Cyan's teacher, Eduardo, was also unclear when he had made this breakthrough. Coupled with the high-level fire magic that initially burned the entire forest, Cyan's abilities had surpassed what was expected of a student, reigniting the interest of the talent scouts, making him a hot commodity, ready to be reported to the higher-ups upon their return. Meanwhile, facing Cyan's lethal intent, Will also finally decided to get serious. As he saw Cyan launch the Firebird again, combined with a wide-range annihilation spell, his first thought was that it was rather tricky. After all, the Firebird alone was enough to crush most contenders, not to mention the additional magic. But that was just his initial thought. Seeing Cyan abandon defensive spells, Will sought an opportunity to strike at the Guardian's core. At the very moment both their lives hung in the balance, a wall appeared out of nowhere, abruptly interrupting the fierce battle. Looking up, the one who appeared was Colette. Seeing her current attire, Cyan blushed with embarrassment. It was only upon inquiry that he learned she had just had a fierce battle with Julius, which ended with her victory. However, what she didn't know was that she had only defeated a clone of Julius. As Will and Cyan battled fiercely, figures of Julius appeared in every corner of the arena. It was unclear what secret technique he had launched, but it was evident that all competitors were simultaneously under his attack, except for Wignall, who was also among the top 3 students and could easily defeat him. Everyone else was slowed down by him. His goal was indeed to buy time. Meanwhile, in the finals arena, amid the excited expressions of the judges, Julius's team, Squad 9, led by him, unexpectedly broke through and arrived first. Just when the judge thought the championship was undoubtedly decided, suddenly, a figure descended from the sky like a meteor. The person landing in the finals arena was Will, who had decided to settle the score with Julius once and for all. The man never expected that the one he thought he could easily trample, the last in the rank, who didn't know magic, had always been hiding his true strength. The swordsmanship considered inferior by the world was like a fish in water in his hands. Not only could his sword cut through magic, but it could even easily neutralize the supreme secret techniques created by the 5 highest staves of the continent. This scene instantly shattered everyone's perceptions. Just a short while ago, they had thought Julius securing the championship was a done deal. Even though Will descended like a meteor at this critical moment, nobody took him seriously. Julius even wanted to use him as a stepping stone to demonstrate his absolute power to those scouting for talents. Facing the sudden smoke, Will thought it was just a smokescreen. Julius intended to ambush him with his 2 teammates within the fog. At the same time, he felt the presence of magical energies from 3 directions. However, this reassured him, as even if his vision was obscured, it hardly affected him. Instead, by quickly moving and constantly changing positions, he could simply counter each magic attack launched in his direction. But as he thought this, he never expected that Julius, who was right in front of him, could launch the same kind of magic from a different direction, catching him off guard and striking him directly. As the smoke cleared, he was shocked to find multiple clones of Julius on the field. Others might not understand what was happening, but he was all too familiar with this magic. However, in his moment of distraction, Julius seized the opportunity. His clones were capable of self-destructing. By the time Will realized, it was too late. He was hit by this tactic and was completely encased in ice. At this point, a few knowledgeable spectators, like him, recognized Julius's magic. This ice clone technique was one of the 12 kinds created by Elfaria, one of the highest 5 staves. It could create ice clones resembling oneself that could attack autonomously according to the caster's will. From a certain perspective, Julius had already reached the level of the highest staves. Originally, upon hearing that he had self-taught this magic, Will was merely surprised. But he never expected Julius to suddenly start mocking. "Elfaria's magic isn't that great. Someday I'll expose all her secrets." Hearing this, Will was deeply offended. The one thing he couldn't stand was someone insulting his childhood crush. However, just as he took a few steps, he realized that several of Julius's clones had surrounded him. Thus, he had to deal with the immediate trouble first. But this was just Julius's appetizer. The real reason he had the clones surround Will was to launch another secret technique, an ice prison starting from the clones. Seeing how Will couldn't break free, Julius laughed. In the next moment, he activated his contingency plan. As everyone looked up, they noticed an enormous ice spike had appeared in the sky. At his command, the ice spike plummeted the next second. Will had no chance to dodge. Witnessing this scene made everyone realize just how terrifying Julius could be. Even Eduardo couldn't help but praise him, saying, "To win without moving a step. That is the mark of true talent in the magical world." And just as he said, it was only Julius's clone performing all this while. His real body hadn't moved an inch. Seeing that victory was within his grasp, Julius didn't hesitate to begin promoting himself. With his current display of power, he questioned whether he was now qualified to be Elfaria's successor. His question instantly sparked cheers from the crowd. If Julius wasn't suitable, then no one else would be. However, some disagreed and mocked Julius for only playing tricks. The next second, Will broke out of the ice, but the first words he uttered were unexpectedly a thank you. It turned out that the magic from before had helped him calm down, as anything related to Elfaria always got him overly excited. But Julius was not interested in hearing him talk and attacked again the next moment, directing his control magic towards Will. However, little did he know, from that moment on, Will was a completely different person. Instantly, he positioned himself behind Julius's two lackeys and, with a single strike, eliminated them from the competition. The reason he did this was that he had discovered a weakness in Julius's technique. Oddly, at the same time as his lackeys fell, all of Julius's clones also shattered. As the audience puzzled over this, Will revealed the truth. It turned out that the skill Julius had self-taught was not perfect. The clones did not have their own will, and required his companion's assistance to control them, just as Julius was fuming with anger. Unbeknownst to him, high up on the tower top, Elfaria's deputy was delivering information about Julius to her, telling her that given his performance, he was likely to become her successor. However, upon hearing this, Elfaria was indifferent. What she wanted was not a successor, but someone who could stay by her side. Meanwhile, the battle between the two reignited. However, from the moment Will regained his composure, the tide of battle never turned again. It was ironic that Julius still thought he had a chance. Although after losing his companion's support, the clones he summoned could only serve as stationary turrets. A clone, after all, is just a clone. As long as Will couldn't discern which was the real him, that would be enough. Through this, he thought he could still turn the tide. But just as he thought this, the next second, Will immediately spotted his real body. Even though at this critical moment, he swiftly used an ice wall to defend himself, the meager protection of a magician's frail body was hardly enough. The mere shattering of the ice brought intense pain. But at this moment, what Julius was more concerned about was how Will had discovered his true self. It was because there was a flaw in the clones he mastered. Their body temperature was the exact opposite of the caster's, about -36 degrees Celsius. This caused the cold air to leak out, resulting in ice forming at the foot of the clones. If he had truly mastered the technique, this would not have happened. This revelation completely broke Julius's defense. As he struggled to comprehend how Will understood his magic better than he did himself, Will did not hide the truth. He explained that it was because he and Elfaria were childhood friends. Not only were they both orphans, but they had also grown up in the same orphanage. Hence, he knew her magic better than anyone, its strengths and its weaknesses. From the very beginning of the battle, Julius was destined to lose. Upon hearing this, Julius was utterly humiliated. It suggested that his pride in learning this magic had made him a clown from the start, and pitifully so, just like a little girl. Realizing this, he completely lost his mind. After a burst of laughter, he used his last trump card, instantly creating 8 clones. This was the limit of what he could currently control. Even though he couldn't control them well, Will simply destroyed them one by one, dissipating Julius's earlier arrogance, forcing him to flee like a rat. Initially, he tried to resist by pulling and struggling, but soon he realized that no matter how fast or dense his attacks were, they could not stop Will's advance. Instead, it only allowed Will to close the distance constantly. With only a sword, Will shattered all his hopes, and in the final moment, chose not to use his sword, but rather his iron fist to end it. With Will's punch, the battle came to an end, and at that moment, it caused the entire arena to erupt in excitement. A nobody who couldn't use magic had just defeated an elite with over 10,000 academic points, a scenario they couldn't have imagined before. And just when the victory seemed to be Will's, as the referee was about to declare it, someone had already taken the lead. It was Wignall, ranked in the top 3 of the same academic year as Julius. Unnoticed by the audience, he had appeared on the scene. Although it was unexpected, according to the rules, the championship rightfully belonged to Wignall's team. It was regrettable, but Will was not fixated on it, as he had accomplished his initial purpose in entering the competition. What he didn't know was that, at the same time, atop the tower, Elfaria was explaining in the air that she wasn't bullying Will. She just wanted to keep playing with him. The man never expected that his male roommate, who had lived with him for years, was actually a clone created by his childhood friend using magic, all to keep him from flirting around. This had always kept him under surveillance, which completely baffled Colette, who liked him and mistakenly thought her rival was a man. Recently, after the Grand Magic Festival, although Will made a sensation in the competition, the internal strife with his teammate Scion caused his scores to drop, resulting in no headhunters approaching him. But there was one change that had occurred. His status within the school had completely reversed. No longer was there the previous discrimination against those at the bottom. Instead, now every student was incredibly enthusiastic toward him. But without exception, they all shared the same goal. They wanted Will to join their squad during the comprehensive practicum. Unbeknownst to them, graduation was nearing, and starting from the next semester, the comprehensive practicum would begin. At that time, the school would open the previously restricted 7th to 10th levels of the dungeon, organizing everyone to hunt high academic point monsters. This was the only time so far where one could earn a large number of credits at once. Will's performance in the Grand Magic Festival had suddenly made him a hot commodity. If it were just the boys, it might have been bearable. But seeing a bunch of girls also extending invitations to Will made Colette extremely jealous. She immediately scolded everyone for being too selfish, noting how they had previously looked down on Will. Everyone just thought she was being nosy. When she heard that the girls planned to team up with Will for a dungeon visit the next day, Colette lied and said he already had plans. But Will didn't refuse, knowing that she was just trying to stand up for him. That night, the news reached his roommate, Rosti. Although he appeared calm, Will didn't realize that Rosti's alertness had reached its peak, as it all seemed too much like a date. Indeed, Rosti's concerns were valid. Colette had initially mentioned going shopping on a whim, but then she thought about it and realized it was a perfect opportunity for a date. After dressing up carefully, she was disappointed to find that Will had brought his roommate along, losing the chance for some alone time. Although this made Colette a bit sad, she was relieved that the roommate was just another guy, posing no threat to her. However, just as she thought this, Rosti suddenly took Will's hand, which shocked Colette. What followed completely shattered her view of things. What was supposed to be a sweet shopping trip turned into Rosti's show. The intimate actions between the two raised a bad suspicion in her mind, that Rosti had feelings for Will that went beyond friendship. Taking the opportunity when Rosti went to buy drinks, she finally couldn't hold back any longer and asked Will about his relationship with Rosti, even wondering if Rosti was a woman disguised as a man. At that moment, Rosti returned with the drinks, handing one each to Will and Colette, planning to share one with Will. This left Will confused. Originally, his plan for the day included maintaining his sword, but since the dwarven race has always looked down on magic users, he had to go alone. Will didn't think much of it, but unbeknownst to him, this was a mutual understanding reached between the other two. After sending Will off, Colette asked Rosti if his feelings for Will were romantic, As soon as she spoke, Rosti declared that he liked Will more than anyone else. Just as they began to argue, Will, on his way to maintain his sword, unexpectedly ran into the top student of the year, Lihanna. Upon learning that she needed to see him, Will quickly followed her and arrived at a grand house. However, the scene that met his eyes was quite a shock, as most of the people present had dealt with him in one way or another. Surprisingly, the top 4 students of the year were all there. Will soon understood why Lihanna had summoned him. It was about the comprehensive practicum again. She wanted the 5 of them present to form the strongest team, and together tackle the dungeon. His presence was unknown to Scion and Julius. Just as Scion was about to make a move, Wignall led them to a sea of flowers, dissipating Scion's intention to act. This was a magical, illusionary scenery that only the elf race could conjure. Amidst this tense atmosphere, Lihanna suddenly spoke up, stating that Will possessed qualities they lacked, which would be useful in the dungeon. However, Julius mocked him, calling him incompetent for not being able to use detection magic, and said it was good enough if he didn't hold them back. Unexpectedly, Wignall spoke up for Will, arguing that since they were now like beaten dogs, they should not look down on someone who had defeated them. In his view, Will's performance at the Grand Magic Festival was sufficient proof of his ability to join their team. More importantly, he trusted Lihanna's judgment. He mentioned that post-festival, people like Lihanna should have been approached by talent scouts from the tower. So, why bother giving so much importance to a mere comprehensive practicum? However, Lihanna remained composed upon hearing this. In response to the assertion that people had sought her out, she admitted it was true, but emphasized that it only qualified her to ascend the tower. Yet, everyone present, including her, harbored the ambition to become one of the Supreme 5 staffs. Seeing this, Lihanna asked everyone to put a coin in a cup. As expected, after her statement, Scion and Julius no longer cared about their past grievances with Will. Compared to the ambition of becoming one of the Supreme 5 staffs, their disputes seemed minor. Will was also included among them. Time swiftly passed, and the day of the comprehensive practicum finally arrived. Students were to survive a week in the dungeon. Teachers repeatedly emphasized caution, as there were always fatalities during the practicum every year. Teachers would be stationed on various floors, and students could go there to withdraw if they could no longer endure. While the teachers were detailing these precautions, unbeknownst to them, danger was quietly approaching. The originally smooth, comprehensive internship suddenly took an unexpected turn. They were only supposed to hunt monsters within the first 10 levels underground, but a mysterious creature far beyond that level appeared. Its casual strike even broke through the ground of the 10th level. By the time they regained their senses, they had been transported to the 11th level underground, which was like arriving in hell, a zone where even high-ranking wizards could perish, far beyond their capacity to tread. Unexpectedly, the one who appeared before them as a protector was Will, who was at the bottom of the class and knew no magic. The comprehensive internship had just officially started not long ago. As expected, Will's newly formed strongest team took the lead. With the enhancement of Wignall's wind magic, they left everyone else far behind and were the first to encounter the monsters on the 7th level. Thinking he was the only warrior in the team, Will had wanted to take the front line. However, Lihanna, a mage, took the initiative to approach the monsters first. Accompanied by a burst of dazzling thunder magic, all the monsters were slain. It was only after Wignall explained that they learned Lihanna was not like other mages. She was an absolute expert in close combat and didn't need any frontline protection at all. Moreover, Will soon realized that he couldn't get involved in the others' battles at all. For them, who were among the top 4 in the school year, the monsters on the 7th level posed no challenge, which made Wignall wonder why Lihanna had brought Will into the team. However, Lihanna's explanation surprised everyone. She said it was because the current monsters were too simple, and Will would become useful when they encountered stronger enemies. This was something Will had never expected, especially since he had hardly spoken to Lihanna before, but she had such faith in him. On the contrary, his 2 subordinates, Julius and Scion, continued their usual mockery, telling him not to get in the way. Although what they said was somewhat annoying, Will had no choice. He couldn't use detection magic, which always allowed his teammates to act before him. leaving him with no chance to strike. In the end, he hadn't killed a single monster all the way down. A day passed in a flash, and to ensure the success of their subsequent actions, everyone decided to rest for a while. Just as they were deciding on a safe place to settle, Wignall suggested they could just stay where they were and then created a flame fortress. It turned out to be fantasy magic from the elf tribe. Although it was only an illusion, monsters would not dare to approach as long as they weren't blind. At this time, Lihanna asked Will to distribute rations to everyone. Before the operation, everything had been entrusted to Will for safekeeping. What he didn't expect was that after doing so, not only were the old acquaintances' attitudes poor, but Wignall was even more outrageous. He told Will not to come near him and just leave the supplies on the ground. The reason was that the elf tribe does not touch those they do not acknowledge, and in this team, he only recognized Lihanna. Although this angered Colette, Will endured it, as this was indeed an inherent arrogance of the elf tribe. Although both elves and dwarves are immigrants from other worlds to the magical realm, the elves are a highly respected magical race. The current princess of the elves is even one of the 5 supreme staff holders. During their rest period, Lihanna revealed her plan. She was targeting the Guardian of the 10th level, a unique monster worth 110 credits. Defeating this formidable creature would greatly enhance their evaluation. Therefore, to ensure they were in peak condition for the battle, she decided to head to the 10th level to confront the Guardian. No one objected to her plan. Unbeknownst to them, in a corner of the dungeon, 2 uninvited guests had arrived. Not only were there numerous dead monsters around them, but also a teacher from their academy. Danger was closing in on them. When the team reached the 10th level, they were surprised to find the path littered with monster corpses, and the usually perilous 10th level was eerily quiet. Their confusion turned to shock when they saw the gruesome state of the monster, which turned out to be the very Guardian they had planned to kill. Noticing that it had been killed not long ago, they immediately used detection magic, but the murderer was likely still nearby. However, their detection revealed nothing. As they began to panic, Will suddenly remembered something a teacher had once said. Although detection magic is crucial in dungeons, it is not infallible. The perpetrator could be a mage using concealment magic, and some monsters are capable of evading detection. At that moment, Will heard noises above them, likely the type of monster that could avoid detection. Before they could react, the monster struck, breaking through the floor of the 10th level. When they landed, Will found himself on the 11th level, with only Wignall by his side. The strike had scattered their entire team, and they recognized the 11th level as the City of Nightmares, only accessible to high-ranking magicians, extending all the way to the 15th level. Coincidentally, as they faced danger, the entire dungeon was in turmoil, with reports of monsters going berserk on every level and news of teachers stationed on various floors being killed. The teachers decided to end the comprehensive internship immediately and prepare for a full deployment. Meanwhile, Wignall suddenly awoke and saw the dead monsters around him and Will protecting him. After learning everything, the 2 quickly decided to regroup with the others. Waiting passively would only lead to a quicker death. However, perhaps due to an unknown fear, Wignall kept using detection magic every few steps. Seeing this, Will suggested that Wignall should only activate the magic when they reached the limit of its range to conserve energy. However, this advice only angered Wignall, who was irritated that someone at the bottom of the class was giving him instructions. However, at that moment, Will suddenly noticed the approach of some monsters. There were 3 in total, each worth 8 credits. Will quickly made a decision. He would take on the 2 monsters in front and leave the one behind for Wignall. The minor monsters on the 11th level were no problem for him. After dealing with his, he turned around and was surprised to find that Will had managed to defeat one at the same time as him. As he was momentarily stunned, he suddenly realized that the monster behind him had not been killed. Before he could attack, he decided to use illusion magic to hide. However, the monster did not stop its attack. At the critical moment, Will came to the rescue and killed the monster with a single strike. After the monster was dealt with, Will explained that this type of monster had no eyes and relied on its sense of smell to move, so illusion magic was completely ineffective against it. He only knew this because he had read about it in a book. Given Wignall's level of competence, such a monster should not have been a challenge. Will had only meant to encourage Wignall, but to his surprise, Wignall responded that he was not excellent at all, and confessed that he was actually at the bottom of the class. After learning that Wignall was also at the bottom of his class, Will discovered that their situations were strikingly similar. His goal was to catch up with Elfaria, while Wignall's was to catch up with Alf, who was also one of the top 5 staff wielders. It turned out that Alf was actually Wignall's foster sister, who was nursed alongside him. They grew up together and were very close. Because he was born a bit earlier, Wignall knew more magic than Alf at the time. He only wanted to show off in front of her, but he did not expect that not only could Alf learn magic just by watching, but her power was worlds apart from his. Alf's illusion magic could even create the Forest of Kings, something not even the High Elves could do. After revealing her exceptional talent, the two of them became as distant as heaven and earth. Within a few years, she had become a revered figure. In contrast, Wignall was still at the bottom of the elf community, not having graduated from the Magic Academy even after 6 years. The main reason was that his illusion magic was flawed. This magic, which was supposed to turn illusions into reality, only produced intangible phantoms that could not cause actual damage, no matter how hard he tried. Although he was among the top 3 in his academic year, this accolade was limited to within the academy. Hearing Wignall's past, the two of them were truly in the same boat. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly heard a strange noise. Wignall immediately used detection magic, but it showed no response. However, this kind of incident had occurred more than once or twice before. Experience told Will that this was the dungeon producing monsters. Speaking of how these monsters appeared, it was because the dungeon would automatically refresh every so often. However, Will could understand all this, but he never expected to be so lucky that the monster refreshed here was a special species from the 11th level. Seeing this, he immediately used a magical tool to destroy the monster-producing device, but it was a bit too late, and 3 monsters still survived. Will was very solemn, recognizing at a glance that these were monsters worth 11 credits. They were not only immune to physical attacks, but also had extremely high magic resistance. Their only weakness was the illusion magic of the elf tribe. Wignall hesitated, saying he couldn't do it, as his illusion magic was not complete. However, Will had anticipated this response and simply replied that he, like Wignall, also had an unrealistic dream: to catch up with Elfaria. This revelation shocked Wignall, realizing that he was not alone. At this moment, the battle was about to begin. Relying solely on Will's swordsmanship, they could only defend and not damage the monsters immune to physical attacks. Thinking of what Will had said earlier, Wignall decided to try his illusion magic. With a strong desire for success, however, no miracle occurred, and his illusion magic still failed to materialize. At this moment, he could imagine Will being killed because of his failure, but he was mistaken. At the critical moment, Will not only blocked the monster's attack again, but even encouraged him, believing that he could definitely do it. Even though he knew he was a stain on his tribe and had been abandoned by his elf brethren, Will believed in him unreservedly. As a sense of frustration welled up within him, the image of Alf suddenly appeared in his mind. Accompanied by his firm invocation, his fantasy finally materialized and defeated the monster. Will was stunned by the scene before him, but turned around to find Wignall sincerely apologizing to him, a turn of events Will had not expected, especially since Wignall had rarely shown him kindness before. As the barrier between the two dissolved, another anomaly occurred in the dungeon. A large number of evil spirit sentinels suddenly began to appear, targeting the red and blue duo first. Even though this was the 11th level, Julius did not expect there to be so many. It seemed more like multiplication, which made him instantly associate it with the mysterious monster on the 10th level. Originally, a single evil spirit sentinel had almost cost Cyan his life, but thanks to Will's intervention, Cyan had since made significant progress in his magic, now no longer inferior to the evil spirit sentinels. At the same time, this phenomenon was occurring on every level, with a group of evil spirit sentinels even attacking the headquarters' main base. Ordinary students were no match for them, but fortunately, at this critical moment, Eduardo appeared and killed all the evil spirit sentinels with a single strike, justifying his status as one of the closest to the highest 5 staffs. At that moment, Teacher Warkner also appeared and immediately took Eduardo away, rushing to the 11th level. Had it not been for the cat-shaped magical creature given to Will, acting as a mobile monitor, he would not have known that Will's team had mistakenly entered the 11th level, a place not easily ventured into. At the same time, Will found the red and blue duo, and just as Wignall arrived, he saw Cyan and Julius eliminating a batch of monsters. It turned out not only was Cyan's increased strength a factor, but Julius's clone also played a significant role. Seeing that the two were unharmed, Will was initially very happy, but upon hearing that they had not encountered Lihanna and Colette, he also had a bad feeling. At the same time, the two girls indeed faced an unprecedented crisis. They never expected to encounter a teacher from the academy on the 11th level, but it was not a good thing, but a bad one. Soon they discovered the person was headless, merely using a teacher's head. This instantly revealed the truth. The anomaly occurring in the dungeon was caused by the two of them. Upon realizing this, Colette immediately demanded to know who they were. However, the headless man's explanation was simple. They were just plain villains, aiming to tear apart this false sky, referring to the barrier set up by the highest 5 staffs to defend against extraterrestrial invaders. The consequences of breaking this barrier were imaginable. Knowing the cost of their appearance, he wanted to borrow the girls' heads for a moment, and with that, he launched an incredibly swift slash. Just at the last moment, Will finally arrived at the scene, successfully rescuing the two girls. Although he blocked the attack, the headless man did not take it to heart. The appearance of so many heads excited him, and just as he planned to add everyone to his collection, his companion, citing a lack of time, pulled him away. Since retrieving that thing was their actual purpose, especially as he sensed something troublesome approaching. Before leaving, the opponent summoned the monster from the 10th level. How should Will and his team respond? The man had never imagined that his swordsmanship, deemed inferior by the world, could, when merged with magic, cause such a terrifying change in power. The evil spirit Duke, who was originally impregnable, a terrifying demon that should reside on the 25th floor, was split in half by him with just one encounter. This scene left everyone stunned. Just a short while ago, when they encountered the evil spirit Duke again, everyone's first thought was to run away. After all, with their current strength, surviving on the 11th floor was already very difficult, let alone facing a monster from the 25th floor. Wignall bravely volunteered to buy time for everyone to escape. However, he never expected that his strike, which could instantly kill special monsters on the 11th floor, would be as fragile as paper in front of the evil spirit Duke. As the attack of the evil spirit Duke was about to land, fortunately, Will arrived just in time to save him, preventing him from dying on the spot. Luckily, because the attack of the evil spirit Duke caused many rocks to fall, losing sight of him gave them a chance to breathe. They thought to use this opportunity to escape, but after running for a while, they found there was no retreat. Every passage nearby was guarded by evil spirit sentinels, clearly a tactic of the evil spirit Duke, which completely sealed their escape routes. Although they were strong enough to deal with the evil spirit sentinels, any noise would bring the evil spirit Duke to them in the blink of an eye. Just when everyone was somewhat desperate, Will made a suicidal decision to go and defeat the evil spirit Duke. He had read in a book that the evil spirit Duke was very proud and would not fight alongside his subordinates. If the general was defeated, then the subordinate soldiers would also crumble. But to Julius, this was even more preposterous. He immediately scolded Will as foolish. However, he never expected that everyone else would trust Will unreservedly. What was even more unbelievable to him was that Will suddenly told him that the key to defeating the evil spirit Duke was him. Julius was initially dismissive, but after listening to a few words from Will, it wasn't long before they actively sought out the evil spirit Duke. Julius was the first to appear, just about to chant a spell when, sure enough, in the next moment, he was hit by an attack from the evil spirit Duke. However, the sound of his spell continued, because it was only his clone that had been hit. Just then, Will had revealed to him an unknown secret of the art of white, that the spell could continue. Normally, if the spell chanting is interrupted, the magic cannot be successfully cast, but the trick with the ice staff was different. Even if the clone was destroyed, other clones could continue the chant. This meant that by using this method, Julius could chant a high-level magic spell that required a long incantation, and during this time, The others would help cover for him. Although their attacks were merely an annoyance to the evil spirit Duke, they could at least distract him. Thus, with the cooperation of everyone, Julius finally completed his charge-up, and in an instant, numerous ice spears flew towards the monster. Even though the evil spirit Duke was hit by Julius's powerful move, he was still unscathed. But unbeknownst to him, Will had already taken this into account. After all, this was a monster worth 270 credits. So, it was now Lihanna's time to take the stage. Even though the evil spirit Duke could block Julius's powerful attack, his wings couldn't avoid becoming sluggish due to the ice. With Lihanna's speed, faster than a car, she could definitely take the opportunity to get close to the Duke for the next strike. However, what Will hadn't accounted for was that the headless man, before leaving, had placed a protective shield on the evil spirit Duke. This error in their plan led to its complete failure, because the last effort to save Lihanna ended up causing the goggles given to her by the ice staff to be broken. Little did they know that this small object was actually crucial to her life. Instantly, his brain completely froze. Although it was unclear what had happened to Will, Lihanna immediately called for a retreat because the most crucial part of their plan had failed. Therefore, it was up to her to buy time for their escape. Unexpectedly, Wignall insisted on going with her, clearly hinting at some history between the two. Although they said it was to buy time, this action could very likely mean no return. Only Scion was internally struggling, as fleeing would mean abandoning them, but not fleeing would betray their goodwill. Yet, as he was conflicted, he unexpectedly heard a ridiculous request from Will: to beat him up. With no goggles, he was paralyzed with fear. As the two were already at odds, Scion immediately fulfilled Will's wish, releasing his pent-up anger with countless punches. After numerous blows, Will suddenly became optimistic again. The sudden change in Will's demeanor caught Scion off guard, as if he had become a different person, and he charged directly towards the evil spirit Duke. However, regarding Scion's doubts, Colette told him that up to now, Will was still very scared. A wand could cast magic from a distance, but sword fighting up close was dangerous and could be fatal. Meanwhile, the showdown between Will and the evil spirit Duke was imminent. As Colette had said, he was indeed terrified of close combat, but it was this fear of death that had trained him to have a photographic memory. The moment the monster attacked, Will reacted instantly. He leaped into the air, and seeing this, Colette transferred her magic to him. Instantly, the evil spirit Duke's wing was severed. At that moment, Scion also seized the opportunity. Colette's words had ultimately made him abandon the idea of fleeing, and instead decided to help Will, aiming to attack the evil spirit Duke up close to maximize the damage. However, to everyone's shock, even after taking Scion's high-level magic up close, the evil spirit Duke remained completely unharmed. Just when all seemed lost, a piece of ice crystal suddenly appeared before Will, triggering a memory. Since neither the wand nor the sword had worked, what if he combined both? This was the hint given by the ice staff. Although she hadn't appeared in person through the ice crystal, Will had an epiphany. He immediately instructed Scion to aim the magic at him. Despite not understanding why, Scion did as instructed, and in the next second, a miracle occurred. With a mere swing of his sword, the magic obediently wrapped around his blade. This scene stunned everyone present. They didn't understand what had happened, but the teacher watching through the crystal ball immediately recognized it as the legendary magic sword. At that moment, Will made his move. His pupils turned blood red, and wielding the magic sword, he charged relentlessly towards the monster. With a single strike, the beast was cleaved in two,